Welcome to the show and welcome to Glow So Bright. A viewer has asked me on recommendations on what sort of duty holster they should have for a 1911 handgun, specifically a Tisas 1911 government handgun. I don't exactly have that particular model of handgun, however I do have the answer for you. I can demonstrate it with this Norinco, model of the 1911 A1 45 automatic government pistol. So, for a 1911, all exterior dimensions for these pistols are identical, regardless if it's either chambered in 38 Super, 9mm Luger, or 45 Auto, and some other calibers as well. But as long as it has a smooth dust cover, so this underside of where the frame is, and there are no rails on it, all of them are of a standard size. Let's go check and make sure it's clear, and it is. So, what is a government 1911? Well, a government 1911 would designate a full-size pistol that has a 5-inch barrel. This is different than compact or subcompact officers' or commanders' versions. And what sort of holster do I recommend for duty use for this particular handgun? Well, I recommend the Safariland ALS or ALS SLS series of holsters. It could be the 6000 series holsters, which, well, I don't have the 1911 model here, but I do have this one for a Bred in 92, which is made out of a Kydex material that still has these pieces of hardware to provide retention. Or the 7 series, which they call Safari 7. Which is this one over here for this Glock. Or this one I will demonstrate for a 1911. Now, looking at Safariland's website, or looking for holsters in general for these particular types of 1911s, it should be either labeled as Colt or be labeled as 1911. Select the government size, and it might be a bit tricky to find one that has a flashlight, an underslung flashlight, as well as an optic on it. But for a duty configuration with outside the waistband carry, under adverse conditions, with active retention, I strongly recommend the Safariland series of holsters, specifically the ALS or ALS SLS. So whenever you do get one of these holsters, the most expensive option would be, like this sort of like weird belt paddle over here, and the holster body itself, perfectly fine. Yet for the this rear end, we don't need it. And instead, we're going to replace it and either bolt it on directly to the belt attachment, so it can either be directly mounted to like a drop leg platform, a universal belt loop. This one is a mid-ride. But what I would prefer, and this would provide you greater flexibility for changing out holsters if you have a different handgun model, or to clear malfunctions in case debris falls inside the body of the holster, like a shell casing, a rock, or some other junk. You can quickly detach it from the quick detach platform, this QLS socket over here, invert the holster, shake it out, get rid of all sorts of garbage. But we have this holster over here, and I strongly recommend you get the QLS Fork. So this is called a QLS 19 duty locking fork, and it would attach to the QLS 22 duty receiver plate. So let me go and get this configured. To mount the Safariland QLS 19 fork on the Safariland ALS 7 series holster for the 1911, the tools are included with this kit. So it includes a hex wrench and the bolts and nuts. And the holster body, the hole pattern that is drilled into the holster is universal for that of other mounting platforms. The QLS Fork can mount on a MOLLE adapter, can mount on a drop leg adapter, can be mounted on a belt loop, and aftermarket versions as well. Similarly, for some aftermarket holster makers, the Safariland hole pattern over here is the most popular that I've seen, and it's also quite robust. So in our little baggie, we got ourselves a little hex key, remove the bolts on the affixing the paddle to the holster. A little slight correction. This one has a Phillips head screwdriver, which is not an included tool. I'll go grab one later. Okay, I'm back. I have a standard Phillips screwdriver. This is a number 1 screwdriver, and I'm going to go and remove this last screw, affixing this bottom retention piece in place. Now that's removed. Now these bolts are still stuck in the holster. Let's see if we can reuse that. So, got ourselves a QLS fork and position it so that the holes line up. Now, one feature about this is that you can adjust the cant to your own preference. Cant would mean is that the holster, when ending straight, can be either shifted towards the rear or in a neutral position. Really depends on your draw preference. I'll just set it in the medium position over here to have a slight forward cant. Next, I'll just grab 3 of these bolts over here and just simply thread it in to the holes. One thing I did notice is that some of the bolts that are included are a bit shorter. So I mounted the long bolts over to the top parts, and seems to have a little bit of protrusion. So I'm going to go switch it out to the smaller bolt. Let's go check to see if the bolts protrude through and impede function. They don't. I'm going to go fix the bottom bolt now. So I fixed the bottom bolt in there. There is no protrusion, and we have it configured now in the quick detach QLS configuration over here. So now this is a lot more useful than the original configuration that came in this package. This process to mount a fork to the holster is the same as mounting a plate to an attachment point. Now, if you do obtain a, for example, this drop leg thing or a loop, oftentimes with surplus and police trade and holsters, they come with another holster attached. That's acceptable. These are modular, and you can remove the holsters if you want. So I'll just remove this sort of bolt over here that's protruding. Replace it with a smaller one. If you do have these bolts and sockets and stuff like that, don't discard them. Place them in a little plastic bag and keep them. You might need them later. Okay, so now that the QLS fork is mounted to the holster body, we're going to need to attach our end plate to that of what we choose to mount our platform on. In this case, we have a drop leg holster over here. So the first step you would need would be to remove the existing holster from whatever attachment point it is, if you bought a secondhand holster like from military or police surplus. You can use the same wrench to attach the bolts to attach the fork to the holster or nut, and it works for all the Safariland systems out there. So you're going to need 3 nuts, 3 bolts, and our plate, and our wrench, as well as, you know, whatever we choose to mount it on, whether it be a belt loop, molly, adapter, drop leg, whatever. So it's pretty straightforward. Take our QLS end plate, line up the holes with whatever you choose to mount it on, and have our bolts be attached, have our nuts be attached to the little sockets and holes and match them up. Keep in mind that there are 2 different types of bolts. The one that you need is the one that is a slightly larger diameter. And just simply line everything up. Take our bolt, put on the inside, and tighten down with our hex key. And just simply repeat the same steps. Make sure everything is flush, everything is lined up, then tighten. For our bottom hole, we're going to use our included washer and then insert our nut and secure that with our bolt. And tighten everything and secure it. A little bit of test fitment. Can insert and lock in place. Can it be easily be removed? And it can. So now we have that complete. So now the question is, what sort of mounting system do you want? Well, it could be a drop leg. If you have long and tall body armor such as a IOTV or an IBA, a harness system such as a flick, or some other thing that might go over where your waist and hip line is. Alternatively, a belt loop. It can be very great, very effective. However, you would need a rigid belt that is like 1.5 inches in width or longer, like 1.75. A MOLLE adapter is also a good option if you have a battle belt that does not have provisions for a rigid inner belt. Another thing you can have is an aftermarket plate. Several aftermarket options are out there, and it really works depending on what your own use case is, what your equipment is, and everything else. But with the Safariland QLS system out there, with very good holsters, if it's compatible with the pistol you have, which, for a 1911, it works great. But before you go and run this holster and shoot this gun, let's see what the fitment is. For the 1911, have it be carried cocked with a hammer back and locked. Safety up. Round chambered. And really, there are slight variations within the frame. One thing that will be necessary is that you can use the same hex key. At the very bottom of the slot in a 7000 series holster, you can tighten or loosen it. If it's too loose, there'll be a lot of slop. It can jiggle and rattle. Not good. If it's too tight, then you can't pull the holster cleanly out. So just achieve a nice happy medium. And that, a lot of it is due to preference. You can like tighten or back up the screw. I really like it like that. Okay, let's go do some shooting. Here I have our Safariland ALS holster in place with inside of it a Norinco 1911 handgun, chambered in .45 auto. Let's try it out. Seems fine.